Hi, I'm Nadia, and welcome to my Hidden History channel, where I'm examining some of the less well-known events of World War II. In a series of videos, I'm going to be talking about the brutal conditions inside Stalin's penal system, known as the GULAG. This isn't easy to listen to, but I believe that we should honour the suffering of the people who were sent to the GULAG, and that they should never be forgotten. They include my 68-year-old grandmother and 3 uncles. In a separate video, I'll tell you the incredible story of how they managed to escape. But today, I'm going to talk about how the nightmare began for the millions of people who were transported to the Gulag and simply vanished without trace within it. 15 million people passed through Stalin's labour camps in Siberia, which was a vast expanse covering 5 million square miles. In modern-day terminology, we would describe this deportation in terms of human trafficking and slavery. People could be arrested for no reason whatsoever, simply for being deemed a threat to the Soviet Union. Men, women, children, the elderly, nobody was spared this brutal punishment. Most of the prisoners came from within the Soviet Union, but they also came from the countries in East Europe that Stalin invaded during the war, mostly from Poland. In Stalin's purges of the 1930s, millions of peasants, intellectuals, politicians, and military personnel were sent to his hard labour camps. The arrest was usually signalled by the arrival in the middle of the night by the NKVD, the Soviet secret police. They would hammer on the door with rifle butts, shouting, causing panic and fear within the household. They surrounded the house with armed soldiers, and the bewildered victims inside were given just a few minutes to pack. But they had no idea where they were being taken. What should they bring? Sometimes they were told they didn't need to bring anything, that everything would be provided. That was a lie. The result was that many of them were unprepared for the harsh conditions that awaited them. In Stalin's purges of the 1930s, babies and young children who were too small to work, so less than 12 years old, they were taken from their mothers and given to relatives. But if there were no relatives, they were placed in state orphanages, where conditions were atrocious. These children were treated as outcasts and suffered severe neglect, starvation, and physical and sexual abuse. They never saw their parents again. So the arrest itself was very traumatic. In later deportations in the 1940s, babies and young children were sometimes deported with their mothers. They were usually sent to penal settlements and collective farms rather than hard labour camps. Once arrested, the prisoners were taken to the nearest railway station on wagons, and at the station, able-bodied men were separated from their families. Most of them would never be seen again. At gunpoint, they were forced into stinking wooden cars that were normally used to transport livestock. You can see from this photo of deported Polish families just how overcrowded these trains were. 70 people were forced into every boxcar. It was so crowded that they had to take it in turns to even lie down. There was no sanitation on board, only a hole in the floor that served as a toilet. The cars did have small stoves, but they couldn't be used most of the time because there wasn't any wood to burn inside them. The soldiers locked the doors of the cars, plunging the people inside into darkness, and they were left there sometimes for days before the train even departed. This overcrowded confinement continued for weeks or even months until they reached their destination in Siberia. Imagine how desperate they must have felt, crammed into boxcars like this, not knowing where they were being taken. The trains took the prisoners along the Trans-Siberian Railway to the labour camps, spanning 8 time zones from Moscow to Vladivostok. This track is the longest railway in the world, at nearly 6,000 miles. The prisoners travelled like this day and night for weeks or more, disappearing further and further into the most remote outposts of Siberia, where there was nothing but wilderness and snow. As they went deeper into Siberia, the temperatures plummeted to minus 40 degrees and even lower. Every 3 or 4 days, the train would stop in the middle of nowhere, and prisoners were allowed to leave the train to relieve themselves. Here they collected snow to melt for drinking water, and they searched for firewood to burn in the stoves. Food was only provided when the train stopped, and comprised of a watery soup and a little bread. On board the worsening conditions in the train, the elderly, the sick, and small children died. The dead were unloaded on these stops and left by the railway tracks because the permafrost was too hard to dig with their bare hands. They were forced to abandon the bodies of their loved ones to be eaten by bears and wolves. These tortuous journeys over thousands of miles in overcrowded, unsanitary conditions were intended to psychologically break down the prisoners. They had lost all contact with the outside world. They had no legal protection, no human rights. They had no way to ever get back home. This photo shows a locomotive arriving at one of the labour camps, a coal mine. A sign above the camp says, "Working in the USSR will make you a hero." As awful as the conditions had been on the train, they were nothing compared to what awaited them at the camps. Other prisoners were taken to such desolate locations that there were no barracks or camps. After getting off their trains in the middle of nowhere, these prisoners were marched, often for days on end, to their destination. People dropped like flies along the way, too weak to keep up, starving and without adequate clothing to protect them against the harsh temperatures. When they arrived, they would have to build the camps with their own bare hands, felling trees and building barracks from logs. And in the meantime, they had to live in makeshift shelters called yurtas, like this one, literally dug out of the earth. And other times, they slept in open ditches. It's a good thing that conditions have improved since then, right? After all, the GULAG was dismantled after Stalin's death in 1953. Well, actually, no, because according to a 2017 report by Amnesty International, Russian prisoners are still being taken to desolate regions, thousands of miles from their homes. And they're transported in specially adapted prison trains that echo the Stalin era. 12 or even more prisoners are put in each compartment, and these are of a size that would normally sleep 4 people. Can you imagine getting 12 people in this tiny space? They're allowed to use a toilet every 5 or 6 hours, and in such overcrowded conditions you can imagine that the toilets are disgusting. They have no privacy, no possibility to even wash, on journeys lasting over a month. So this journey is a part of their punishment before they even arrive at the prison. Next time, I'll talk to you about life inside the GULAG. Thank you for watching this video, and if you learned something new, please give me a like below and subscribe to my channel.